They told you to be nice, to be quiet, to not upset anyone. They told you to lower your voice, lower your needs, lower your presence. And you did. Not because you were weak, but because you were wise. Because you understood that safety often comes dressed as silence. You thought if you were kind enough, soft enough, agreeable enough, you'd be loved. You believed that being good meant being good for others, even if it meant being invisible to yourself. But the more you disappeared, the more something inside you began to ache. A quiet voice, a burning truth, a hidden self that refused to be erased. Carl Jung warned us, the more you hide your truth to survive, the more your shadow grows. So now, as your soul grows tired of playing small, you begin to wonder, what happens if I stop being nice and start being real? It started earlier than you remember. Long before you knew the word persona, you learned how to wear one. Maybe it was in the way you were praised for being quiet, for not causing trouble, for making things easier for everyone else. Maybe it was when someone told you, "Don't be so dramatic," or "No one likes a girl who argues," or "You're prettier when you smile." You didn't know it at the time, but those were instructions. Not about your behavior, about your identity, about who you were allowed to be if you wanted to be accepted, loved, safe. So you adjusted, carefully, quietly. You learned to shrink in all the right places, to round off your edges so you wouldn't cut anyone. You became agreeable, pleasant, nice. It didn't feel like a performance, not at first. It felt like survival, like success. You smiled when you were tired. You nodded when you disagreed. You made yourself easy to love, easy to manage, easy to forget. And they rewarded you for it. You were the one they called reliable, mature, level-headed. But no one saw how much it cost you. No one asked what you had to bury to be so easy to be around. You swallowed your truth so often, it stopped trying to speak. You became fluent in the language of pleasing, of adapting, of disappearing. Carl Jung wrote about the persona, the mask we wear to function in society. A necessary mask at times. We all need one to navigate the world. But when the persona becomes your identity, something dangerous happens. You forget where the mask ends and you begin. You become a role, a reflection, a projection of what others want from you. And slowly, silently, you drift away from yourself. The real you, untouched and unedited, fades into the background. Not because you failed, but because you learned again and again that truth was inconvenient, that honesty made people uncomfortable, that expressing what you felt could cost you love, attention, safety. So you played the part. You were nice. You were agreeable. You said yes when you meant maybe. You smiled when your soul was tired. And no one noticed the performance because you became so good at it, even you started to believe it. But deep down, behind the rehearsed gestures and polite nods, something stirred. A tension, a resistance, a quiet question you didn't dare speak. Who am I when I stop being nice? That question didn't disappear. It waited patiently through your teenage years, through your early adulthood, through the relationships where you played small to keep the peace. It lingered behind your eyes when you smiled through discomfort. It burned in your chest when you stayed silent out of fear of being called difficult. It followed you through every "it's fine" that wasn't. And now it's louder. Now it's unavoidable. The mask is cracking, not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're ready. Ready to meet the parts of yourself you had to hide to survive. Ready to reclaim the voice that was trained to whisper, ready to remember that you were never meant to be agreeable, you were meant to be whole. And wholeness begins the moment you question the niceness that was never truly yours. Carl Jung warned that over-identifying with the persona, the mask we wear to survive, can lead to the loss of the true self. And the problem with being nice for too long is that it doesn't leave room for honesty. It doesn't allow contradiction. It doesn't tolerate discomfort. You can't be fully human if your worth depends on always being agreeable. Because real people get angry. Real people have opinions. Real people have bad days. But you weren't taught to be real. You were taught to be pleasant, polished, predictable. You began to notice how much of your life was shaped around avoiding conflict. You said yes when you meant no. You smiled through discomfort. You forgave without healing. You stayed in conversations that drained you, in relationships that silenced you, in roles that shrank you. And the more you did it, the more disconnected you became from your own emotions. Sometimes you couldn't even name what you felt. You just knew it didn't feel right. There were moments when the truth tried to rise, when your body sent signals, tightness in your chest, knots in your stomach, tension in your jaw. But you overrode it. You pushed through. Because being nice meant being agreeable even when everything inside you screamed otherwise. You convinced yourself that other people's comfort was more important than your clarity, that your silence was a gift, that your absence of needs made you lovable. But niceness is not the same as kindness. Kindness is rooted in truth, in choice, in self-awareness. Niceness, when performed out of fear, becomes manipulation. You weren't being kind, you were being strategic, trying to earn safety by never rocking the boat, trying to be accepted by erasing your edges. And no matter how many times it worked, no matter how many people smiled back at you, it always left you feeling a little hollow. You started to realize that your niceness wasn't a reflection of your values, it was a response to your wounds, a strategy to avoid abandonment, a way to ensure you were needed, wanted, included, and once you saw that, you couldn't unsee it. You noticed how often you hesitated before speaking, how often you edited yourself in real time, how often you prioritized harmony over honesty. The persona had become too tight, too small. It no longer fit the person you were becoming. Jung taught that the second half of life is about individuation, the process of becoming your true self, beyond roles, beyond expectations. And this process often begins with discomfort, with tension, with the unsettling realization that the life you built by being nice isn't the life you want to keep living. So you started to question. You started to observe your habits. You began to say no, softly at first. You allowed your facial expressions to reflect your actual feelings. You stopped apologizing for taking up space. And while it was liberating, it was also terrifying. Because niceness had always been your currency, your shield, your way of belonging. And letting it go felt like stepping into a world where you weren't sure how to be. You feared being called difficult, selfish, cold. You worried that people would leave, that they'd stop liking you. And some of them did. But the ones who stayed, they saw you, not the mask, not the performance, you. And for the first time, you felt connection without distortion, presence without pretending, love without self-abandonment. Being real didn't mean being rude. It meant being rooted. It meant telling the truth kindly, holding your boundaries gently, expressing your needs without shame. It meant allowing space for your whole self, the soft parts, the strong parts, the messy parts. You started to trust that your worth wasn't tied to how easy you were to tolerate. That being true was more valuable than being liked. That discomfort wasn't something to fear, it was a doorway to growth. You stopped filling silence with smiles. You stopped volunteering your energy out of obligation. You learned to pause before pleasing, to check in with yourself before responding. You began to see that every time you chose truth over politeness, yourself grew stronger. And while the world might not always applaud it, your soul exhaled because you were no longer maintaining a mask. You were becoming someone real, someone whole, someone honest. And that was worth every uncomfortable moment it took to get here. It begins subtly. You notice yourself hesitating before answering a message. You cancel a plan not because you're busy, but because you're tired of the performance, tired of the effort it takes to keep up appearances. The mask is heavier than it used to be, then it no longer sits comfortably on your face. You start questioning whether the smiles you give are genuine or rehearsed, whether your kindness is a gift or a defense, whether the people around you truly know you or just enjoy who you become for their comfort. Carl Jung taught that the shadow is everything within us that we do not claim. The anger we deny, the sadness we hide, the power we suppress. And when you spend your life being nice, the shadow becomes loud, not in words, but in symptoms. You feel it in your tension, in the irritation that appears out of nowhere, in the silent resentment that builds when someone crosses a boundary you never voiced. The shadow doesn't knock, it invades, not to punish you, but to remind you of what you've abandoned in yourself. You begin to see the price of all the pretending, not in dramatic breakdowns, but in subtle disconnection. You don't laugh the same way anymore. You don't cry as easily as you used to. You feel muted, like someone turned the volume down on your life. You're present, but not fully. You smile, but your eyes are tired. You say you're fine, but you're not even sure what that means anymore. You're so used to managing others' perceptions that you've lost track of your own truth. The shadow grows with every unspoken thought, every swallowed emotion, every time you said yes while your soul begged you to say no. It begins to surface in ways you can't ignore. Maybe it's a passive-aggressive comment that slips out. Maybe it's emotional numbness, a fog you can't shake. Maybe it's a sudden outburst that surprises even you. These are not failures. They are messages. The shadow isn't trying to ruin your life. It's trying to return you to it. But society doesn't teach you to listen to the shadow. It teaches you to suppress it, to label your rage as irrational, your sadness as weakness, your intuition as overreacting. You were taught to be agreeable, not honest, to be pleasant, not powerful, to be chosen, not to choose yourself. So you became what was needed, and in doing so, slowly lost connection with what was real. There comes a moment when the discomfort of staying the same outweighs the fear of being seen, when the cost of niceness becomes too high, when your body refuses to keep holding the weight of everything you haven't expressed, and in that moment, something shifts, not dramatically, but profoundly. You begin to listen. You stop silencing your irritation. You stop explaining away your sadness. You allow yourself to feel not just the socially acceptable emotions, but the raw ones, the ugly ones, the ones that make you feel human again. Jung believed that to become whole, we must integrate the shadow, not destroy it. This isn't about becoming someone else. It's about reclaiming what you pushed away. Your anger is not the enemy. Your sadness is not a flaw. Your frustration is not a failure. They are signals trying to bring you back to yourself. They carry wisdom. They carry power. They carry truth. You begin to ask yourself different questions. Not, will they still like me if I say this? But will I still respect myself if I don't? Not, am I overreacting? But what part of me is finally reacting after years of silence? You start to measure your life by your own inner compass, not by others' approval, and it feels unfamiliar, unstable, scary, but also right. Your shadow doesn't want to hurt anyone. It just wants to be acknowledged. It wants to sit at the table, to be part of the conversation, to remind you that wholeness doesn't mean perfection. It means inclusion. And as you begin to allow your full range of emotions, something powerful happens. You start to feel alive again, not just functional, not just efficient, alive. You might cry more often. You might feel waves of anger, bursts of sadness, unexpected joy. That's not regression, it's resurrection. The return of your real self, the one who feels fully, speaks truthfully, loves deeply, the one who no longer hides behind nice, the one who chooses real over likable. And some people won't like it. They will miss the version of you that asked for nothing, that agreed with everything, that smiled through discomfort. But their discomfort is not your responsibility. Your only job now is to be honest with yourself, with your needs, with your limits, with your yes and your no. Because you can't be whole and hidden at the same time. You can't live a truthful life from behind a mask. You can't find peace while waging war on your own emotions. The shadow isn't here to destroy the life you built by being nice. It's here to help you build something better, something rooted in truth, in depth, in integrity, something that feels like home. And for the first time, you're ready to live there. You start to notice something strange happening in the way people respond to you, not because you've become louder, not because you're seeking attention, but because you've stopped performing. You've stopped apologizing for your presence. You've stopped shrinking in rooms that never deserved your silence. You speak more directly now. You hold your posture with more certainty. You choose your words with intention, and still you say less. It's not arrogance, it's clarity. A quiet alignment that needs no explanation. But some people don't know what to do with that. They flinch when you stop laughing at jokes that rely on someone else's discomfort. They stumble when you hold a pause instead of filling it. They get defensive when you don't rush to reassure them, because your presence now reflects something they've been avoiding in themselves. And you realize you've become a mirror. Carl Jung wrote that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But the reverse is also true. Everything that irritates others about us reveals what they are not yet ready to face. You're not trying to provoke anyone. You're simply existing without the mask. And in doing so, you unintentionally shine a light on the masks still tightly held by those around you. It's a strange form of loneliness, being more yourself than ever, and yet feeling the room shift away from you. Some conversations grow shorter. Some smiles fade quicker. Some people begin to treat you like a stranger, not because you've hurt them, but because you've stopped making yourself small enough to keep them comfortable. And you learn. Your growth will cost you relationships with those who prefer your past version. This is the part no one warns you about. The grief that comes not from losing others, but from finally seeing them clearly. The realization that so many of your connections were built on your ability to mirror what they wanted to see, that your niceness was the glue, and without it, the bond dissolves. But something else happens too. You start attracting people who don't need you to pretend, who don't flinch at your truth, who hold silence like an invitation rather than a threat. You find yourself in conversations that feel nourishing, in spaces that feel calm. You begin to experience connection that doesn't cost your authenticity, and you wonder how you ever settled for less. It doesn't mean the mirror becomes a weapon. You don't walk into rooms trying to reflect people's pain. You're not interested in judgment. You're interested in truth. But truth, by nature, disrupts illusion. And your willingness to be real makes you magnetic to some and intolerable to others. That's not yours to fix. You begin to notice the subtle shifts in your energy. You listen more, not to respond, but to understand. You say less because not everything requires your participation. You detach, not out of indifference, but out of self-respect. You stop chasing validation. You stop performing empathy where it's not earned. You conserve your warmth for spaces that don't try to use it as fuel for their own comfort. This is the paradox of awakening. You become more connected to yourself and, in doing so, more disconnected from anything built on illusion. And some will call you cold or distant or difficult. But you know the truth. You are clearer now. Your yes is honest. Your no is clean. Your silence is not passive. It is intentional. It is sacred. You no longer mimic the energy in the room. You hold your own. You no longer nod just to avoid conflict. You let the discomfort rise. You no longer bend yourself into shapes for someone else's convenience. You allow your boundaries to be a filter, not a fence. And through this, your presence speaks louder than your words ever could. You've become the kind of person who doesn't need to say much to be felt. The kind of person whose authenticity exposes performative harmony. You're not trying to lead, but people notice when you do. You're not trying to challenge anyone, but they feel challenged anyway, not because you're aggressive, but because you're free. And freedom is confronting. There's a power in being unshakable, not loud, not dominant, but rooted. And that's who you're becoming. Not a mirror of others, but a reflection of your own truth. And yes, some will look away. Some will walk away. But those who remain, they see you, not the projection, not the version that made them feel better about themselves. You. And finally, you see yourself too, not through the lens of others, not through the performance of being liked, but through the quiet knowing that you've stopped hiding, and that, above all else, is peace. Grief doesn't always arrive in black clothes or during funerals. Sometimes it shows up on an ordinary afternoon when you suddenly realize how much of your life you lived for other people. It creeps in when you hear yourself laugh and don't recognize the sound, when you sit with your own silence and feel like a stranger in your own presence, when you look back at old memories and wonder who that version of you was really trying to be. This grief is quiet, but it's deep. It doesn't scream, it lingers. It wraps itself around moments you thought were happy, revealing the cost they carried. The parties you attended out of obligation, the relationships you maintained out of fear, the kindness you gave from an empty well. You grieve the years you traded authenticity for approval. Carl Jung said, "You're not what happened to you. You are what you choose to become." But before you become, you must mourn. You must feel the weight of what you lost: time, energy, clarity, voice. You must honor the younger version of you who didn't know better, who thought being loved meant being pleasing, who thought safety meant silence, who thought being nice would eventually be enough. That version of you wasn't weak. That version was surviving the only way they knew how. And now, as you awaken, the grief comes not to shame you, but to cleanse you, to clear the space where your real self can finally breathe. You grieve the moments you said yes and wanted to scream no. You grieve the times you smiled through betrayal. You grieve the way you betrayed yourself just to keep others comfortable. And it's a strange kind of sorrow, because the world may never understand it. You may not even be able to explain it. It's not about one big loss. It's about 1,000 tiny deaths, the slow erosion of self in the name of being good. And when the dam breaks, when the feelings you buried finally rise, it can feel like drowning. But this grief is sacred. It means you're no longer numb. It means you're no longer asleep. It means you've begun to feel again. And feeling is the first sign of coming back to life. It may feel like falling apart, but it's actually a coming together, a gathering of all the pieces you once scattered to be more digestible, a welcoming home of the parts you once exiled to survive. Every tear you cry now waters the roots of the person you're becoming. You might feel regret. You might think, why didn't I do this sooner? You might wish you had spoken up earlier, walked away faster, chosen differently. But be gentle. Regret is the shadow side of awakening. It's natural. It's human. It doesn't mean you failed. It means you see more clearly now. And clarity is a gift, even when it stings. Let the regret pass through you, but don't let it build a home. Use it as a guidepost, not a prison. This grief is also lonely, because it's a solo journey. No one can do it for you. People might not understand why you're withdrawing, why you've stopped texting first, why you cry at nothing and everything, but you're not falling apart. You're unfolding, shedding the armor that once protected you, but now suffocates. You're mourning the version of yourself who made everyone else a priority while forgetting her own name. And that mourning is holy. It is how you break the spell of performance. Jung believed that grief wasn't just about loss. It was a threshold, a passage into deeper wholeness. And once you cross it, you don't return the same. You speak more slowly. You listen with more depth. You sit with your feelings instead of silencing them. You stop reaching for quick fixes. You begin to trust that your healing doesn't need to be rushed. That transformation is not a straight line. That becoming whole means making space for sorrow. You begin to realize that what you lost wasn't just time. It was the illusion that being agreeable would protect you, that staying small would keep you loved. And as that illusion crumbles, you make peace with the discomfort. You stop asking your past self for answers she didn't have. You stop trying to rewrite history. You accept that the pain was part of the path, not because suffering is noble, but because it woke you up. In grief, you find your depth. You learn to sit in the quiet and not run from it. You learn to feel the ache without rushing to numb it. And in that space, something new emerges: self-respect. Not the kind built on achievements or praise, but the kind that comes from finally telling yourself the truth. I mattered then, even when I didn't know it. I matter now, even when it's messy. I will matter tomorrow, even when I'm still healing. You realize that you don't want your old life back, not if it means abandoning yourself again. You don't want to return to the version of you who was so focused on being liked that she forgot to be real. You're not interested in pretending anymore. You'd rather be alone than perform for company. You'd rather cry in truth than smile in denial. You'd rather be misunderstood in your authenticity than adored in your absence. This grief, then, is not an ending. It's a beginning. The ashes of your former self fertilize the ground where your real self can grow. You're not broken. You're being reassembled, stronger, truer, more whole. Not because you've found all the answers, but because you've stopped abandoning the questions. And in that honesty, you find peace. Grief doesn't disappear. It transforms. It becomes reverence for who you were and resilience for who you're becoming. It no longer weighs you down. It grounds you. And from that ground, you rise. Slowly, steadily, authentically, because now you know the cost of pretending, and you choose to pay the price of truth instead. There comes a moment after the grief, after the unraveling, where you no longer feel like you're breaking. You're not rebuilding either, not exactly. It's something gentler than that, something quieter. You begin to notice that you're remembering yourself. Not the version you constructed to survive, but the one who existed before you learned to be nice, before you learned to smile to avoid conflict, to keep your thoughts to yourself, to measure your worth through the comfort of others. That version of you wasn't polished. She was wild, unfiltered, curious, and she's still in there waiting. Carl Jung believed that the goal of life is individuation, the integration of all parts of the self into one coherent whole. Not just the parts you've been praised for, but the ones you were told to hide. Your defiance, your intensity, your longing. The truth is, you don't need to become someone new. You need to unbury who you already are. Underneath the layers of performance and politeness lives the real you, the one who knows what she wants, the one who feels deeply and dares to say so, the one who doesn't contort herself to be palatable. You start to reclaim her in pieces, in the way you say no without explanation, in the way you pause before replying, checking in with yourself first, in the way you no longer make yourself responsible for everyone's comfort. You realize that being good is not the same as being whole, that you can be kind and firm, soft and bold, loving and boundaried. And in this space of paradox, you begin to feel free. This is integration, not self-improvement, not perfection, but wholeness. You're not building a better version of yourself to be more acceptable to the world. You're weaving together the pieces that were scattered by years of pleasing. You are forgiving yourself for the years you spent in performance. You are welcoming back the parts of you that were exiled to keep the peace. And in doing so, you begin to live from the center, not from the edges. You start to live slower, more intentionally. You are no longer in a rush to prove anything. You no longer strive for validation that never satisfied you in the first place. You begin to realize that clarity matters more than being liked. That peace is more valuable than applause. That silence is not empty. It's full of answers you couldn't hear when you were too busy performing. There's a deep exhale that comes with this remembering, a loosening of the armor. You feel it in your body, in the way your shoulders relax, in the way your breath deepens, in the way your nervous system finally believes you are safe. Not because the world has changed, but because you have. You are no longer abandoning yourself to be chosen. You are choosing yourself without apology. And it's not always easy. Some days you will still feel the pull to go back to old patterns. You'll still hear the voice that tells you to be careful, to soften your edges, to stay small. But now you notice it. You recognize it for what it is, a relic from a time when you needed to hide to be safe. You can thank it. You can honor it. But you no longer obey it. This is the invitation to wholeness. Not a destination, but a way of being. A commitment to live aligned, to say what you mean, to feel what you feel, to stop performing your life and start inhabiting it. You no longer need to be anything other than who you are, fully. And that, in itself, is revolutionary. You begin to surround yourself with people who don't require your performance, who don't flinch at your truth, who welcome your boundaries as clarity, not rejection. You create a life that doesn't drain you. You choose peace, even if it means disappointing others. You speak softer to yourself. You celebrate in private. You stop reaching for things that numb. You reach for things that nourish. You live in your own timing. You realize you don't need to heal to be worthy. You don't need to be perfect to be enough. You don't need to have it all figured out to take up space. You simply need to keep choosing truth over illusion, self over performance, presence over perfection. And in doing so, you remember what it feels like to be whole, to wake up and feel your life fit you, not like a costume, but like skin. The world may not understand this version of you. It may still try to coax you back into the performance. But you've changed. You've remembered. And that memory is not going anywhere. It lives in your bones now, in the way you walk, in the way you breathe, in the way you say no without guilt and yes without fear. You are not a character in someone else's narrative. You are not a reflection of other people's expectations. You are not a shell for other people's comfort. You are a full, complex, ever-evolving self. You are not here to be agreeable. You are here to be real. And the world needs that version of you, the one who remembers, who reclaims, who refuses to disappear. This is the life after nice, the life after pleasing, the life after performance. It's quieter, yes, but it's also truer. It's steadier. It's yours. And in that ownership, in that quiet revolution of returning to yourself, you begin to live not for others' comfort, but for your own wholeness. And that is where freedom begins. When you were younger, time felt like pressure. Every birthday was a reminder of what you hadn't yet achieved. Milestones became measurements. Promotions, relationships, status. They weren't just life events. They were proof that you were keeping up. There was always a clock ticking quietly in the background, whispering that you were late, that someone else your age was doing better. That time was running out. And in that race, you began to fear time itself. You feared what it would reveal. You feared falling behind. You feared becoming invisible. But something begins to shift as you grow into yourself, not all at once, and not loudly, but slowly and with clarity. You stop rushing, not because life got easier, but because you began to understand that urgency was a lie, a story you were told to keep you distracted, to keep you comparing, to keep you striving for things that never really felt like yours. You begin to question the timeline. You begin to see that there is no universal right time for anything. There's only your time, and your timing has always been perfect, even when it didn't feel like it. Carl Jung spoke of individuation as a second birth, the process of becoming whole, of becoming yourself. And it doesn't happen quickly. It's not supposed to. Depth takes time. Healing takes time. Becoming takes time. and not the kind of time that can be scheduled or optimized or hurried along, the kind of time that requires patience, that requires quiet, that requires faith in the unseen. You begin to notice the beauty of slowness, how much you missed in your younger years by rushing through them, how often you were present physically but absent emotionally, because your mind was always racing toward what came next. But now you pause, you linger, you allow space for wonder. You sit with a moment until it finishes speaking. And that's when time becomes something else, not your enemy, not your judge, but your collaborator. You stop measuring your life by age. You stop counting how many things you've done and start noticing how many things you've felt. You realize that being on time for someone else's schedule often meant being late for your own soul. And now, you're not interested in being early. You're interested in being aligned, in arriving when your spirit says yes, not when the world says hurry. There is a softness that comes with this realization, a kindness. You begin to look at your past self not with frustration, but with compassion. You understand that the rushing was never about ambition. It was about fear. The fear of not being enough, the fear of being forgotten, the fear of missing your chance. But life is not a door that slams shut if you don't run fast enough. It's a series of invitations. Some you'll decline. Some you'll miss. Some you won't even notice until years later. And yet, the ones meant for you will always find you when you're ready. You stop asking, "Is it too late?" and start asking, "Am I ready?" You stop trying to catch up and start focusing on showing up, fully, honestly, softly. You let go of the comparison because you finally see how little it serves you. You see the lines on your face not as evidence of fading, but as proof that you've felt deeply. You hear your own voice getting steadier, your boundaries getting clearer, your needs getting simpler. You care less about being impressive and more about being true. You realize that youth was never the prize. Presence is. Carl Jung believed that the second half of life is when we begin to truly live, not because we have more answers, but because we've stopped asking the wrong questions. You're not wondering how to be liked. You're wondering how to be honest. You're not trying to gain more approval. You're trying to feel more peace. You're not searching for status. You're returning to self. You no longer fear slowing down. You welcome it because you understand that stillness is not the absence of growth. It is the space where growth takes root. You no longer rush decisions. You no longer push through exhaustion. You rest. You pause. You listen. You let yourself be guided by something quieter than urgency and tuition. You realize that some of the most important things in your life didn't happen when you wanted them to. They happened when you were ready. And readiness isn't always visible. Sometimes it looks like stillness, like pulling back, like quiet days, like nothing is changing. But underneath, everything is shifting. You trust now that life is not behind you. It is unfolding ahead of you, within you, through you. And the pace is not up to the world. It's up to your soul. You don't fear being late anymore because you finally understand the truth. You were never late. You were just waiting for the right version of yourself to arrive. And now that you're here, everything is right on time. There comes a point when you stop measuring legacy by what you achieve and begin to feel it in how you move through the world. You no longer see your worth in titles, in numbers, in applause. You start noticing the legacy you leave behind in rooms you exit, in words that linger long after conversations end, in the feeling others carry when they remember you. And that's when you realize legacy isn't what you do for the spotlight. It's who you become in the shadows. It's the truth you live when no one's watching. It's the quiet presence that changes everything without needing to be seen. Carl Jung believed the second half of life was not for building ego, but for building essence. Not the mask, not the identity you crafted to belong, but the self beneath it all. The self that doesn't care how many followers you have, how impressive your resume sounds, how well you perform in social spaces. The self that's been whispering all along, saying, leave something real behind, and you begin to feel it not as pressure, but as purpose. You no longer crave to be remembered as the most successful, the most agreeable, the most admired. You want to be remembered as someone who told the truth, as someone who made others feel safe enough to tell theirs, as someone who didn't just survive, but transformed. You realize your legacy isn't loud. It's not in the things you post, but in the things you practice, in the way you hold space for someone's sadness without trying to fix it, in the way you speak boundaries without shame, in the way you apologize when you're wrong, even when no one demands it, in the way you stay soft, even after everything that tried to harden you. It's in your silence, the kind that isn't empty, but full of presence. It's in your restraint, the kind that refuses to react out of old wounds. It's in your laughter that comes not from politeness, but from soul. These are the things people remember, not your productivity, not your status, but how they felt when they were around you. Did they feel seen, heard, safe? Did you allow them to be human? If so, you're already living your legacy. You begin to understand that legacy isn't something you build one day. It's something you build every day, through the micro choices, choosing truth over comfort, choosing rest over proving, choosing stillness over noise, choosing to show up as you are, not as you should be. You stop curating your life for admiration and start curating it for alignment. You care less about who you impress and more about what you embody. You are no longer seduced by recognition. You are drawn to resonance, to the feeling of inner peace that comes from living in integrity, to the freedom that blooms when you no longer betray yourself to be liked. And that shift, that's your legacy taking root. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And now you see that becoming yourself is not just your journey, it's your offering. The more honest you become, the more permission you give to others. The more grounded you are, the more others find stability in your presence. The more whole you become, the more healing ripples out through every space you enter. You may not write books or build monuments. You may not be quoted in history. But you will be remembered in the child who feels safe around you, in the friend who stopped apologizing for existing because you modeled self-respect, in the stranger whose days softened because of your quiet kindness. That is legacy, and it is sacred. You're no longer here to perform. You're here to transmit. Your presence is no longer a question mark, am I enough? But an exclamation point, I am. And that changes everything. Because when you walk into a room rooted in your truth, others feel it. They may not understand it. They may not be able to name it, but they'll remember it. They'll remember you. Not because you were the loudest voice, but because you were the clearest signal, the most anchored energy, the one who didn't need to take up space to be felt fully. And there's a peace in knowing that. A peace that doesn't rely on approval or recognition. A peace that says, I am living my truth, and that is enough. That is the legacy I leave. So you keep going not faster, but deeper. You keep choosing the harder thing when it's the honest thing. You keep removing the layers that never belonged. You keep showing up not perfect, but present. You let the world adjust to your authenticity, not the other way around. Because this is what it means to lead with soul, to embody your values, to live in a way that echoes. And long after your name is forgotten, the frequency of your presence will still move through the lives you touched. That is your legacy, and you're already living it. So if they told you to be nice, to be quiet, to stay agreeable at all costs, let this be your reminder that you were never born to disappear. You were never meant to fold yourself into smaller shapes so others could stretch out more comfortably. You were never created to be soft enough for everyone to hold without ever holding yourself. You were made to feel, to speak, to know, to remember. You don't have to go back. You don't have to return to the version of you that once kept everyone else comfortable while carrying the weight of your own silence. You don't owe the world a performance. You don't owe anyone a likable version of your pain. You owe yourself the truth. And the truth is, you were never broken. You were edited, tamed, rehearsed. You played your part so well that even you forgot it was a script. But the play is over now. The curtain has closed, and in the quiet that follows, you get to meet yourself again. You are not here to keep pretending. You're here to embody, to live your life from the center, not the edges, to move through your days, not asking for permission to be real. You are not behind. You are not late. You are arriving. You are beginning. You are remembering what was buried beneath the performance, beneath the persona, beneath the be nice you carried for so long like armor that never really fit. So walk forward not to prove anything, not to win anything, but simply to exist as you are. That is your revolution. That is your liberation. That is your becoming. And the best part is you're just getting started.